Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump into the chain rule now. In the last video, we just reviewed some pre-calculus, but now we can figure out how to mix that together with calculus. So what we're going to do here is we're going to learn the chain rule. So the chain rule says if we're working with a composition of functions, this notation is the same thing. If I put an x here, this notation is the same thing as f of g of x. That's just composition of function notation. So the chain rule tells us that to take the derivative of a composition of functions, I take the derivative of my outside function and I leave the inside function alone. Okay. And then I multiply all of that by the derivative of the inside function. Okay. That's interesting. Let's do this with one of the examples from above. So let's use this to find the derivative. Oops, sorry, d over dx of cosine of e to the x. So we've identified our inside and our outside functions already. So we've got those up here. Let me erase some other things so that we're working with all we have. Okay, so this is the first step in the chain rule, is to identify your inside and your outside functions. Now we have to take the derivatives of both of these. So the derivative of my outside function is negative sine of x. The derivative of my inside function is still just e to the x. Okay, and so now the chain rule tells me I look at f prime of g of x times g prime of x. Okay. The g prime of x piece is easy. That's just the e to the x. That's just the derivative of the inside function all by itself. The f of g of x piece, or f prime of g of x, means I take the derivative of the outside function and I put the inside, I replace the original inside function as the x in here. So I get negative sine of e to the x from that piece. Okay, so in this case, the e to the x is kind of mix ourselves up. This is the original inside function, and this is the derivative of the inside function. So let's just keep doing examples to see how this works in general. Okay, so for this first one, let's call this y is equal to this guy. I need to start out by finding my inside and outside functions. So my outside function, I'm going to call f of x as always. My inside function, I'll call g of x. Sorry about that. So my inside function appears to be 3x. My outside function is e to the x. I need to take derivatives of each of these. I'm going to have e to the x and 3. Okay, and now I have to plug this all back together into f prime of g of x times g prime of x. So f prime of g of x means I take the derivative of the outside function and I replace its x with the original inside. So I get e to the 3x. And then I multiply all of that by the derivative of the inside function, which was 3. Okay, so we could write this as 3e to the 3x if we wanted to write it a little nicer. I would encourage you guys to go ahead and try the next couple of examples on your own and then watch me do them. It's good to practice, especially identifying, or if you get stuck along the way, start out by trying to identify the outside and inside functions and then see how far you can get. I'm going to go ahead and keep recording now. So this next one, my outside function, we'll call f of x. My inside function, I'll still call g of x. Okay, so my inside function seems to be x squared. My outside function seems to be sine of x. If I find my derivative, the derivative of sine of x is cosine. The derivative of x squared is 2x. If I'm going to use the chain rule here, and I will because it's a composition of functions, I have f prime of g of x times g prime of x. It's good practice to keep rewriting this formula. This one's a little bit harder to remember than the product or the quotient rule. Okay, so my f prime of g of x means I take the derivative of the outside function and I replace the x with the original inside. So I get, I get cosine of x squared, and then I multiply all of that by the derivative of the inside times 2x. Okay, let's keep going. And hopefully you're trying this next one on your own. So let's see again, outside, inside. So my inside function here looks to be that polynomial 4x squared minus 2x plus 1. If I replace all of that with an x, I'm left with x to the 9th as my outside function. The derivative of x to the 9th is 9x to the 8th. The derivative of that polynomial is 8x minus 2. Okay, so now I'm going to use my chain rule, f prime of g of x times g prime of x. F prime of g of x means I replace the x here with the original inside function. So I'm going to have 9 times 4x squared minus 2x plus 1, all raised to the 8th power. And then I multiply all of that by g prime. So multiply all of that by 8x minus 2. Make sure you put the parentheses there because that's all getting multiplied. Okay. And then let's do this last one. So my outside function here is going to be square root of x. Finding the inside's always better than first, but I'm getting lazy. My inside function is 5x cubed minus 1. The derivative of my outside function, let's rewrite this as x to the 1/2. So my derivative is going to be 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. You can leave it like that. I'm going to go ahead and write this as 1/2 root x just because that looks prettier, but both ways of writing it are perfectly okay. My g prime is 15x squared. And so if I look at f prime of g of x times g prime of x, so f prime of g of x, I take my derivative of my inside or outside and I replace it with the original inside. So I get 1/2 root 5x cubed minus 1. Again, if you had written that as 1/2 times 5x cubed minus 1 to the negative 1/2, that would be perfectly okay. I multiply all of that by g prime, so all of that times 15x squared. We could write this as 15x squared over 2 times that radical. If we wanted to simplify it a tiny bit, but both are correct. You might start recognizing some patterns with these. Some textbooks will have you like memorize patterns for like number 1 and number 3 here in particular. I don't want you to memorize patterns, but if you get comfortable with doing these without writing all the steps out, that's okay. It's first day of working on this. I want you to go ahead and write out your f of x and your g of x, write everything out so that you're not making a mistake along the way.